So today I'm here to talk about a curriculum for a new urban planet. That's the idea. But I'm coming from Science City, Zurich. That's where I am a professor. Now, I've done a long journey from Caracas to New York, and then from New York to Zurich to ETH. This is where Einstein got his degree. I hope I don't peak at 26, because then I'm in real trouble. But I'm also coming here to tell you about this last round ecology. For those of you who might like it, it's on our ETH website. It's a magazine that we have that's an open source magazine. It comes out every 6 months, and what it is family and friends. It's completely free. You can download it and enjoy. But those of you might think of the Latino as kind of the Mexican with the big hat in the sun, kind of sleeping. Well, that's not exactly the case. You also have Al Pacino and Scarface, but I'm really interested in a new hybrid Latino, which is kind of a Swiss mariachi, no? Or a wrestler. We're very interested in really blurring the boundaries, crossing and doing the walk across political frontiers. If those of you who were here last year might recognize the man there on the left is Ricky Burdett. We took him down into the depths of Caracas' political situation, which I'm going to show you a little bit right now. The guy who was shooting off the bridge with the gun is now one of the ministers in the government. So, just to let you know, I've been 10 years with hyperinflation, 3 coups d'etats. I've been in every one of those marches, and I think without realizing it, I didn't know this was happening also around the world when it was happening to us. But Tahrir Square teaches us a great lesson. This is a fantastic article by Bernard-Henri Lévy. I suggest all of you look up this French sociologist, philosopher, who really says that it's the beginning of a new world, a new democratization, and it's not easy. It won't be an easy process, so don't be skeptical about it. But my life and my journey takes a long route. It's kind of a 2-lane blacktop revisited. For those of you who know 1970s film, starring James Taylor and one of the Beach Boys, they take a road trip across America, and for no reason, just to see what they want to see. And in that sense, our intention was to kind of capture what was happening in the city in Caracas. And what is happening was the growth of what we call the informal city. Informal is not the binary of formal, it's actually something different. Informal, it's information, it's another city. We started to look at them very carefully and document and watch over time the way houses were built and stuccoed. You can see the same house here transformed. We went to Europe to talk about it. This was 2001. We were landing in Europe from New York when the Twin Towers was being hit by another plane. And this was at the Pontresina conference just outside of Zurich. So we've been on a road trip to try and tell people that there's another city happening, a secondary city. This secondary city that we call informal cities, right, is the biggest population growth for at least Latin American cities. And it's really two sides of the same coin. Informal is also a fallout, if you want, of the formal city. But how we think and work, I'm going to talk about maybe one thing, that slums are the rule. Urbanism is frozen politics. The expanding role of the architect. You will judge whether my architecture is somehow miscellaneous in a category called miscellaneous, or is it architecture? We'll see. And basically accepting the unaccepted. And maybe ordering the city from the point of view of the informal, not the formal. So I take my view of cities from the informal cities, which is actually the largest growing population. So what we've done is we've gone around the world, we've started to map a series of cities. We map them with a series of theoretical conditions, the highway city, the modern utopia, and what we're doing is trying to find coincidences. Now, in a conversation with my friend Arjun Aparanturai, philosopher, sociologist, he said, why don't we just forget about success? Just forget about the word success. When people tell you, and you've got a great idea, and they tell you, can you please give me the econometrics of that idea? Show me the impact of what that will have at an economic and social level. Just forget it. If I, in all my projects, took the time to create all these econometrics and hire people to do them, because that's not my condition as an architect and designer, I would be wasting my time. So basically what we need to push is more experimentation, and we need to just go out there and maybe go for failure. Weren't highways failure? Weren't suburban sprawl failure? I mean, so how do we judge what's successful and not? So we map this out all on a chart. And this whole experiment that you will be able to view hopefully next year, in 1 year, is called Gran Horizonte, which is this expanding horizon of the architect. It may be true that one has to choose between ethics and aesthetics, but it's no less true that whichever one chooses, one will always find at the other end, the other at the other end of the road. So, in other words, it's not a choice between ethics and aesthetics. It's actually whichever side you begin with your ethical concerns or your aesthetic concerns, they will meet each other. You'll have to actually make them work and come together. In my case, we set out on the road here because we don't know anything. We don't really know things. And it's a little bit like Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn in Mark Twain's novel, don't know nothing. And get that in your head, because if you do know, Mark Twain is the birth of the American novel. By bringing in the colloquial, the common speech of the street, of the Mississippi, into the form of the novel, he actually broke through and created the modern American novel. This is super important. So as urban designers and architects, we are facing a crisis. As Godard points out in that earlier quote about ethics and aesthetics, it is critical meditation to think between the ethical position and the aesthetic formulation that gives rise to the creative product. Architecture is coming to terms with the realization that we have largely ignored how the majority of human beings live. For decades, the focus has rested comfortably in the global north and the norms of Western culture. Collectively, designers, books, magazine projects have only gazed above the socioeconomic equator. Not only has this limited our field creative palette, but has depleted our field's legitimacy. And that's why architects are falling out of legitimacy, because we really are only designing 1% of what's built. If designers and architects are to improve cities and impart meaningful strategies to subsequent generations, we must begin to look southward with creative intent. The slums of Latin America, Asia, Africa, and the recently impoverished suburbs of North America and Europe cast doubt on the traditional notion of city growth as self-contained and this functional organization of space. So, again, I'm not for rationalization, I'm not for functionality necessarily. I am for process, and process being assumed by communities and by people who engage in that process. So the city is a very complicated thing, but the truth is it's about the people. You're forgetting people. People are the essence, density, social density. If we could work somehow to make cities and measure them in terms of social density, but I've thrown that out to a few friends, and hopefully with MIT and Carlo Ratti at the end on Friday, we can have more about this discussion of how we can think about making a coefficient that's not urban density, but social density. How many things are happening in the same place at the same time? Maybe we can measure it through GPS and internet, right? But these are some of our clients. So we went out on the street We went out to see the people that we were ignoring in Caracas. And that's why we had such rioting and such conflict we still have today. There's more to come. These are Juan and Amalia, some of the friends that we set out. And why? Because I'm interested, what's my role? What's my role? How can I bridge these borders between people? And Eric Hobsbawm, who in 94, who's now about 94, by the way, and living in England, in 1994, he already had a vision saying that the future was about social distribution and not growth as a topic. So we went out, created an NGO, started to work with communities, giving prizes with sports. That's how the whole thing began. I was a designer, but we created this kind of sports activity. Why? Because we wanted to understand where the population was going to grow in the world. This is a map, a pixelation of the future growth to 2030 of the world. It'll happen mostly in the south, and it'll in your territory, and it'll happen mostly in slums. So we better find a way to traverse this boundary. This is the wall between Tijuana and United States. And this is that fateful day in 2001. But you see, all of these things are intricately connected. And I think the architect now is really capable of making correct connections. So those connections, but I don't mean connections in a line. How can we expand that line? How can we expand that line between Tijuana and actually create some program that can be shared between Mexico and the United States? So the revolution is in design, right? It's not a political, ideological revolution, but it can be a revolution through design. We've heard that today. So we set out to write this book called Informal City. It's a Presto book published in Germany, but what we wanted to find out really, what policies, what was missing, how can architects respond to a situation where we're missing 2 million units of housing in Caracas. How do you create 2 million units of housing? It's exponential, the problem, right? When we can barely build 25,000 units a year of social housing. So is the glass half empty or half full? Well, I tell you, it's half full. And John Turner, the famous English architect from the 70s, also would say, if you want to solve the problem about housing, don't build any, right? Just let people build their own housing. Start to invent ways in which you can lay down the infrastructure, create sites and services, but not the conventional sites and services that we knew from the past. Let's think of a sites and services project that is actually vertical and keeps the city compact. So informal settlements are not the problem, but the solution. They're no longer places of poverty, because not everyone who lives in informal cities are poor. It's also not free places to live. It's rented, sold every day. So those are some of the myths that we went out to prove. But I'm just going to give you a few examples now. This is the largest social housing block, 23 de enero. 48 blocks were built as a modernist statement to Le Corbusier in Caracas. And what happened after they were immediately built? The squatters settled right in between the houses. So you would say, unlike the blocks of Newark and Chicago, let's say, where they were those ghetto blocks, vertical, that were knocked down, here in Caracas, it actually worked. Because as this secondary layer of the city set in to the blocks, it created all the missing services, the laundry, the restaurants, the daycares, and all the missing things that the modern block did not contemplate. So function sometimes follows form, right? This is a new project that we're working on, which is 45-floor housing tower, the largest tower in all of Latin America in concrete. It was a bank 17 years ago that was building its iconic building. And the bank went bust in the financial crisis of Caracas. And the building has been squatted by 3,000 families. Now you would say, horrible, what a disaster. But actually, the 3,000 families have created an ecosystem inside that is quite amazing. Each apartment is retrofit, water's brought up, water tanks, sewage has been put in, and people are building out their apartment. It's like a social experiment. And that's why I say, let's look at alternative models. Not only that, but on different floors, you get shops, you get all kinds of social services in the tower. We're now going back and seeing how we can retrofit that tower. But why do I bring that tower? Because think about Dubai. So, goodbye Dubai. Maybe all of those office towers in Dubai can be retrofit into housing, and maybe we can move the Chinese over there. So Petare is another story. Petare is an incredible story. When I arrived in Caracas, the mayor, behind his desk, had these white spots in the back of his city maps. I said, what the hell are those white spots? And he says, well, those are green zones. I said, green zones? You've got 800,000 people living there. And if he put those people on the map, he would have to address them and bring them services. So he just ignores them. It's these two black spots, Petare Norte and Petare Sur. So what we've been doing is kind of identifying, trying to integrate what we could do with similar mountains like this. And you'll see a project in a second. Petare is actually the story about frozen politics. Urbanism is frozen politics. Get that in your head. So if architects did not want to engage politics, they're wrong. And actually Team 10 in the 60s, unfortunately into the 70s, then they went bust. Peter Smithson didn't build a single building after 1970. Why? Because he engaged in politics. He challenged Margaret Thatcher. Well, I think we have to pick up and on that note and challenge politicians to actually look at their city in appropriate ways. How do you do that? You map things, you visualize them, you show them the conditions. And these are actually the first maps we did, which is the growth of the slums in Caracas from the 1950s onwards. All the yellow spots are slum growth. About 3 million people living there. It's about 50% of the city living on maybe 40% of the territory. So what are those slums like? Hernando de Soto, World Bank laureate, economist, says just give them land titles. He comes up with this great idea that the invisible capital, it is a really cool idea for Mexico City, but how do you do it on hilltops? Houses are built over houses. Only the dogs know where the boundaries to a house are. So this is the kind of situation he wants to give land titles. How do you give land titles when you don't even have infrastructure? So first put the infrastructure in, then we can talk about land titles. So this is a play area, a little square in Caracas, Cota 905, where during the day kids play basketball, and in the night it becomes a shooting gallery. But then there's another problem. For designers, this is an incredible, huge field that you guys must tackle. How do you get mail to those areas? The guy here is just checking in a box on a main street to see if he had any mail. It's just they place boxes full of mail to people that say they live in La Vega, but no one really knows. So just getting a system for mail would be very interesting. So we started to plot all kinds of things that the residents wanted, working with the kids, the older people, and we started to envision what a fantastic thing would be. We retrofit, we put all kinds of sewage, electricity back in, and the streets could become some fabulous learning center, rock climbing, exercise place. This was only the beginning of our understanding of these hills. I'm taking you through 10 years, so bear with me. This is just the theoretical part. So we came up with these ideas. Can we retrofit these hills with cable car stations? We went to Austria, to Doppelmayr, that had only done cable cars in ski slopes and tourist sites. So we said, you've got a huge market. Why don't you come down and sponsor us? They did. We began an investigation on these hills right here, which is called San Agustin. You have 70,000 people. These mappings that we did had a huge power. We were able to show what houses had been upgraded, how much money people had invested in each one of those houses. And we were able to show the government, through the voice of the community, how the situation really was up on that hill. Because the government was very skeptical of using a cable car that would be shot at, completely. So we started to plot out where the nodes could be for different stair systems, parks, pocket parks, topography, plugins, trying to understand these drawings, by the way, are hand drawings, because all you can do is go up there, not with a computer, very complicated, they'll steal it, you have to go there with little notebooks and make your hand drawings. And we began to identify the idea of the stairs, but during the rainy season, they can't be used at all. So the first thing we did was create a new stair system that could be built locally by any artisan there, and the stair could rotate on this rotating swivel and connect different sites and get people where they needed to go. But our dream was really the car-free city. How could we make this hill car-free? Well, the government came up with a plan here on the right to put a road system in. But if that road system was put in, it would have knocked out 30% of the houses. So we began to really think, that was hard, how we could envision this cable car. No one knew how to put a cable car in the site. So we began to create these idea of hubs or stations. The stations were lightweight. They were concrete because it was the cheapest available material. People know how to pour concrete. But the whole system was accessed through ramps. And we worked with the community to justify, and I didn't go to the government. The community took the drawings to the government. And through that, and with this book in their hand, they went to our current president and said, here's the project. Of course, immediately gobbled up. And they called our sponsors in Austria, Doppelmayr. Doppelmayr said, yes, but if you want to do it, you have to work with these architects who have been doing this whole idea. So that's how we boomerang back in. Maybe some of you know that Saskia Sassen, a book called TAR, Territory, Authority, and Rights, that's worth reading, where she says that a little grain producers in Minnesota or something had to trampoline to France to get some European Commission on trading rights to get back at Cargill in the United States to let them raise the price of their grain because they were buying their grain at much too low a price. So we came up, so this is the idea, to traverse boundaries, political boundaries, using different intelligent modes. Okay, so the cable car is 5 stations, 2.4 kilometers, has 5 hubs. You go up with the metro ticket in hand. You go from the bottom station up the hill to 3 stations and then back down to the next metro stop. It really connects the formal with the informal. This is the idea. And we had to create all kinds of signage systems through the stairs to indicate how to get to the different stations, right? And here you see the first photograph of the station on the top of the hill. The roof was flown in with helicopters, with military helicopters. And you would not believe how the community today is changing. Every house is being upgraded. And not only is this a merry-go-round, it doesn't just loop moving 1,500 people in 2 directions. It actually, each station is like a plaza, a square. It wants to have plug-in infrastructure, social infrastructure. So here plugged into the side is a vertical gymnasium. It's under construction here, and here you can see the roof finished, with the kids playing soccer, and you have 4 floors of sports activities. So pregnant women, children, old people who took 2 hours to get down the hill now can go down in 10 minutes. This has completely transformed the hill. Because it really is not about this one thing. The idea is to create a toolbox. What I want to convince you guys, and I think the younger generation really understood it, especially Renee from South Africa, where she was saying, things can be combined. Why don't we design architecture that can be moved? So the cable car now is being exported to Brazil. This is Morro de Providencia, and it will go down to one of the Olympic sites, another one of our projects, but I won't go into it too far. So the toolbox, what it wants to do is to diagnose topography. It wants to create plug-in infrastructure. It wants to consolidate the public. It wants to prefabricate. It wants to go vertical. It wants to think topographically. It wants to diagnose morphology. It wants to capture unused space, and the list goes on. And I'll show you one more project to that extent. And here in São Paulo, where in the middle of the worst favela in São Paulo called Parisópolis, it rains every day. So or at least 6 months out of the year. So we said, what can we do there? Well, maybe we can use this idea of going vertical. But we decided not to go vertical only with a vertical gym and sports as a kit of parts. By the way, here in this photograph is the current mayor of Baruta, who gave us a project for our first vertical gym. He's now the opposition candidate for Chavez currently. And he's the one who created this project. This project was a little sports field, and we brought in the vertical gym as now a freestanding piece. This is the kit of parts that is put in, steel structure, brought in, assembled by the local people who already know how to build very well. There it stands at the foot and on the edge of Barrio La Cruz. And the walls there are the actual walls, original walls of the houses. Now, a building like this of the vertical gymnasium would be happy to have received 1,000 people per month. This gym, where only 6-on-6 played, an original site where I used to play, now receives 15,000 people per month. So any museum would be happy to have that kind of visits. Now, finally, is music. I thought it would be appropriate to end on a music project. This is the genius of the ghetto. This is Dudamel. Dudamel is the Los Angeles Philharmonic conductor. He came out of a ghetto in Caracas. He is the sponsor of this next project, and we went to bring music to the masses. We didn't really know how we could create music schools inside the slums, but this was his project. So we began to work on a prototype. All of our buildings take 5 years, 10 years to produce. And we think them around, but we were not able to realize it under the Chavez government at the moment, so we went to Brazil. In the middle of São Paulo, we found an incredible site. The city mayor helped us, where there was a music school. This is the site. The site is a natural bowl. It's where they collect all this rainwater. We said, we can fix it. This is a natural risk territory. We have to remove people. They could not live there. This is the site at the moment. We created an amphitheater that's an urban agricultural kind of training ground. We analyzed the topography, the risk zones, removed the houses, and we're building new housing for them. And there will come a new music school that's sponsored by the Youth Orchestra of Venezuela, who's sharing knowledge, open source. So the real thing is to really open source. But maybe this is the last image I might want to leave you with. Forget about urbanism, where we can think we can design the total, where we can understand the whole. Forget it. It's fragments that we can design. It's fragments of this world in which we can understand things, right? In small fragments. It's like cloud computing. So maybe we can come up with a way to retrofit townships, informal cities, that can be a kind of acupuncture that plugs in, creates a center, creates a kind of civic place, secure place, and then the rest will just retrofit by itself with a kind of do-it-yourself method. So I think this center that wants to become a hub, a generator of electricity, recuperating all the rainwater that goes into the ground. And not only be just a little building, but the building and the landscape work together. They're connected by bridges. So it's a building that actually unfolds into the landscape. These are some of the drawings. So our projects are like the iPod. They go in evolution from, and the buildings change, but they're essentially the same building, the simplest infrastructure, with the simplest infill block. And maybe to end on that note, if you think this is new, it's not new at all. And those of you who know Corbusier's, house, domino house, you will know that Corbu drew this fabulous slabs in the air with the stair system, but maybe many of you, it's the image of modern architecture, but many of you don't know is that was social housing, post-World War I, 1917 housing, and he drew it without walls so that you could retrofit it with all the rubble that was left from the World War. Thank you very much.